9. The rules around pheasant shooting in England look set to change. There is going to be an interim system involving a licence being required to release pheasants and partridges near nature reserves because of their effect on wildlife and plants. One of the groups that's been campaigning on this is Wild Justice. Mark Avery, its co-founder, is on the line, as is Tim Bonner, Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Good morning.
Morning.
Mark Avery, is this the change you wanted? Because it is an interim system.
It's pretty good. We'll have to see how it works out. But Defra, in the papers they released yesterday, recognised that there are 62 million pheasants and red-legged partridges released into the countryside every year, 50 million pheasants, nearly 12 million red-legged partridges, and that's about 10 times as many as when I was a lad. And they recognise that those non-native game birds do damage. And what they do is they go around gobbling up vegetation, they eat invertebrates, they even eat small vertebrates like snakes and lizards, which many of which are declining. Their droppings, can you imagine what 62 million birds' droppings look like?
But under a licensing system, you could have very similar numbers, couldn't you? It just depends how those licenses are handled.
It does depend on that, but Defra have said, it's a pity you haven't got them because they'd be able to claim the credit for this. They have said that they recognise that there's a problem and that they're going to deal with it. And they signed a court order yesterday which promises to bring in measures that will meet the requirements of the Habitats Directive. And if they don't do that, then Wild Justice will go back to court. And I don't know what the technical term is, but they'll kind of be in contempt of court as well, because they have promised they will do this properly.
Let me turn to Tim Bonner. I want to ask you about these numbers, because they are just so striking. 60 million pheasants and partridges released a year. That's a massive increase from where it was in the 1970s, when it was about 4 million a year.
Well, shooting is incredibly popular. It's one of the biggest growth industries in the countryside. A lot of people want to do it, but that is spread across the entire country. There's nearly nowhere in the country where pheasants aren't released, pheasants and partridges aren't released at some time or other, at some density or other. So I think we can take the numbers with a pinch of salt. And there's an awful lot of livestock and poultry and all sorts of other domestic animals in the countryside, and these birds are obviously released and wild after release. But the strange thing about this is it's actually not really about any particular outcome. Like most of Mark's court cases, it will achieve almost nothing other than to create another layer of bureaucracy.
Because you don't think it's going to change the numbers?
No, because pheasants, there is no evidence whatsoever that pheasants or partridges are doing any significant damage to these special sites. There is simply no evidence. But what the legal seam that Mark is mining is the fact that because of EU legislation and changing interpretations, the government is having to prove a negative. It's having to prove that damage isn't being done. And it can't do that.
Just pause for a second, Tim Bonner. Mark Avery, can you prove what you were saying about the effect on vegetation, insects, other animals?
Yes, just read the review that Defra published on their on the government website yesterday.
Yes, it is on their website, but also the Environment Secretary George Eustace has said that the negative effects tend to be localised with minimal or no effects beyond 500 metres.
I think we would challenge that, but the fact is that this only applies to areas around most important wildlife sites, which are places like the New Forest, Salisbury Plain, the North York Moors, Dorset Heath. If Defra didn't think there was a problem from these massive releases of game birds, then they certainly wouldn't be doing this.
You would imagine, Tim Bonner,
that with Tim Bonner than they are with Wild Justice.
Can you prove, Tim, that there is no effect from the release of so many millions of birds?
No, and that's the point. At the moment, Defra cannot prove that there's no effect, and it is putting in place a temporary licensing system until it can. That's what the papers say. That's what Defra Defra has said it so. And we welcome that, because we're very confident that sustainably run shoots, properly run shoots, have a positive impact on the environment and on SACs, not a negative one. So we need to sort out the system. We need to sort out a licensing system until the government and Natural England can do proper assessments and monitoring. But in the long run, we also need to sort out the law, because these sort of arcane legal points, which Mark is pursuing, will continue until the legislation on which they're based, the EU legislation, the environmental legislation,
Tim
and especially the precautionary principle, are challenged.
Okay. Tim Bonner, Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance, and Mark Avery from Wild